All right, so we're doing our second alla prima assignment. This is the 100-mile painting, where I've got a few colored Lego blocks in an arrangement. And the goal is to use atmospheric techniques to create a greater depth of space. It's an alla prima assignment, so I'm going to try to work fast or faster. And as I was saying before I realized I didn't hit record, because I'm trying to create a sort of large distance of a feeling of great depth of space, I'm going to have to exaggerate our atmospheric perspective techniques. And what are those again? As objects or as elements recede into the background, they're going to lose intensity of value. They're going to lose intensity in chroma, that is the color. They're going to lose intensity in saturation. They're going to lose information in details. And as things come forward in space, I'm going to increase those qualities. One other aspect of this assignment is to think about size and scale. Size and scale, as a reminder, size refers to the literal size of things. In my space or in my setup, maybe a couple of inches describes each block. The canvas is 9 by 12. That's the size. The scale is a feeling of size and size relationships. If you've ever bought something online and it looked bigger or smaller than online than when it arrived at your house, that is generally an issue of scale. And that's why we put like a penny next to something so we can see that scale. And so I'm thinking about how do I increase that sense of depth, that sense of space? How do I get as close to 100 miles rather than a couple of inches? And one thing I can do is I can think about size and scale. I can think about how far, or sorry, just adjusting my camera here. And I think by increasing my sort of scale, meaning that if I have if my baseline and my eye line are closer together, and I sort of zoom in, so I'm gonna have to paint these objects bigger than they are, so that they have a feeling of being bigger than they are. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm mixing a general color for my background. And similar to last week, because I'm starting off with because I'm doing an alla prima painting, I'm going to start off with a lighter color to sort of lay down my drawing. So I'm going to start off with like a light green to just start placing things. Doing kind of a blue green here.
Picture of your setup in chat.
I don't know. What would be the value of that?
I don't know what you're painting.
Maybe I'll do that in the future. If I do that now, it's going to take us quite a bit of time to do that.
Do you ever mix like two blues together, or do you choose one blue to make your green and then stick to that blue?
I'd use different blues. It just depends on what I'm trying to do. If sometimes you need a warm blue instead of a cool blue to do something. Sometimes you need the two, so like sometimes you want more of the purplish quality of an ultramarine, but you don't want it to be ultramarine, so you might mix ultramarine blue into your cerulean blue. I kind of already know that if I mix cerulean blue with white, I get close to my background because I've painted this construction paper before. I just need to neutralize it eventually. But yeah, definitely there's instances where you would want to do that.
Okay. I just thought it would make it too muddy or something. Too many colors.
Yeah. It all depends. I like the idea that, and I forget who said this, but like, there's no, I think it might have been Richard Schmid, but the idea that there's no such thing as a muddy color. There's only colors in the wrong spot,
Hmm.
right? So generally a muddy color, it just means that it's in, it's a color that shouldn't be there. It's not in the right spot. And so it appears muddy because it's out of place. I forget who it was I was talking about not knowing hopefully by laying this in quickly, you'll have a better idea of what I'm trying to draw or paint. And then the referent becomes less important. Hmm. Kind of not too into the placement. Let's rub that out real quick. Okay. Try that again.
Orange, maybe the one at your desk and stuff. The one at your desk, where you don't have one. Don't you have one at your? Yeah, you need that one, I'll charge it.
Someone's got their microphone on.
Then I'll check it, so that one, the Jeff gave you is fully charged. If they don't have the charge one. So,
Maybe that's a little more interesting. Then I'm kind of tight over here. Move it again. And we'll see how much of this paint I'm gonna have to fight. And I'm making myself a little bit of a mess. So we want it way over here now. over here. All right. Start with that. You mush it around if you need to. I make a bigger batch, more aggressive with the paint today. Again, feel free, sometimes I get wrapped into thinking about the painting that I forget to make commentary. So feel free to ask questions. It's necessary. Right now I'm just mixing a blue that's close to the blue of my background. And like I said, I want to make sure I make a bigger batch. I will just bring all of that into here. And so I'm mixing cerulean blue with white. And then just a little bit of orange to cut the intensity of blue. The backing on that. I don't know why this keeps rotating. mixing a grayish color for the floor plane. Mine's a warmish gray. And I know that the blue from the wall is inflecting it in some way. And that's why I went ahead and started right away with some of the orange mixed into the blue, knowing that I'd get somewhere in like a warmish gray by doing that if I tint it enough. And so that keeps these colors related, keeps them related on the picture plane also. That's pretty close. Could be a little warmer. Yeah, pretty close. And then I already know I'm gonna be continuing with the green of the ground. I already have it there, but we'll just put more paint on top if we have to later.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the colors. I know you, for the bottom, it's a light gray, but you wanted them to feel good with each other, but I didn't catch the colors. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all right. So when I made the blue for the wall, I used cerulean blue, which is our warm blue. I tinted it pretty high key. Depends. Some cerulean blues are lighter than others, so it just depends on your tube. And so I tinted it with I tinted the cerulean blue. And then I added just a touch of orange to knock it down, to sort of desaturate a little bit, because it does have a little bit of desaturation. And then to make the gray of the floor plane, I used my orange and that same blue, because I knew they would neutralize each other, right? That's why I added orange to this blue in the first place, to get it slightly neutral. It's still very blue, but if you add enough of it, it starts to get towards gray. And so I grabbed some of my orange, added some white, added that, the blue, and got it towards the grayish, the warm grayish that I was looking for.
Got it. Thank you. But didn't you put a little bit of orange in the original color as well?
Yes. So when I was making
Okay.
when I was making the wall color,
Yeah.
I put a touch of orange in that because I needed to desaturate, or I should say, make it less chromatic. I don't know why this keeps turning.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
I think it's because when I mix on here, it turns. Yeah. Sorry about this. I should be able to lock into place. I don't know why it's not. All right, so I've got that laid in really fat, kind of thick, and now I can go into my other colors. Could start in the green or the add a little bit. It's gonna get cut up over there. Eventually. All right. Let's work back to front then. But we'll work with our red first. So I'm looking at my red. It's a cooler red. The red in the foreground is more cool, I realize, than the one in the background, which sort of throws off the whole atmospheric perspective thing. So I might just have to change that myself. And it could be that certain light is bouncing off in certain ways off the surface here that's bouncing back into. So this one's back here is red, and then I have a red right here too. And so when I paint these, the goal is going to make this one more intense, more red, more strength and value, etc. And that one, I can exaggerate it and make it even more soft and more red. The top plane, I might have to invent a little bit because I got these little stubs, but I'm going to pretend that my blocks don't have the little Lego kind of teeth or whatever you want to call it. They feel like teeth when you step on them. So I'm going to kind of ignore that. So some of them I have to invent. This goes back to our conversation earlier about memory, but also drawing from our knowledge of light logic and color theory. And so, for example, when I do mix this red, I'm going to have to mix that color into that red because that light is reflecting into it. It's happening on this side too. So these are things I'm going to have to take account of as I move forward in the painting. This panel here, this front part of the block, is its most solid red. So maybe I'll start with that. That's a very intense red. If I put a dot here, it's pretty dark red, but it's intense. So let's just soften it a little bit. For now, we could always go back and adjust if necessary, although I did pick a very tough color to have to rework later if that becomes the situation. Better go home. And then on this left side, a lot of this blue pink thing happening here. Now I'll have to adjust this a little too. Before I start modeling any of that, I'm just going to start trying to block because I won't know. I can try to model this and try to get it more correct and start figuring out, the edges a little better, etc. But I'm not quite convinced on my reds yet. I can't commit to it yet because I haven't worked this red and I want to get some of the other color relationships out. So I get it approximately. I'm going to break it down more. Like, when I look at this, I have like a really intense red corner that happens right before it turns into the other corner. These are things I can, if I have enough time in my alla prima painting process, my alla prima painting time, can address later. And so I guess to a long story short, working from general to specific. So now I'm going to move in front to this like purple block. So this is a purple, this is like a lilac, and then this is a blue, more blue than this, almost kind of moving towards the turquoise. Guess that shadow later. The blue of the other object's a little bit more like slightly moving towards a turquoise or tealish color. I made that too long, but I'm not too concerned. The assignment is not about, when I'm not trying to make super accurate Legos, etc. I'm more interested in color relationships and edge qualities that I will continue to develop as I move through the painting. Deal with some of those later. Before I start noodling with that, I want to get the rest of my blocks laid in. I'll go ahead and start with the green one and then do the red block. So this is green and that's red. It's more of it's a very warm green. I'll start off with my emerald. Let me clear out a little workspace for me here. So I'm gonna still need these colors. Yeah, did someone have a question? Nope. Okay. Dark green. And then needs a little higher key instead of white, because white will just pale it out. I'll try with a little bit of, well, still gonna need a little bit of tinting. It gets us almost too fluorescent. And so we do want some white in there. What brush to use for this? With an alla prima painting, the more brushes you have, the better. That way it's like I have my red brush reserved for the red because it's so intense. I don't want to mix it into the other colors. I have a blue brush. And then I have my gray brush. So now I need a green brush. And I'm gonna
I found that out too, Christian. I use so many brushes.
Yeah. I remember I used to, when I'm landscape painting, I feel like this is what my hands look like. Yeah. 6 in each hand, 1 in my teeth. And it's a green in the shadow that gets very blue. So I'm in it because green is here. This, goes back to the question, which blue would I use? Well, I'm just moving from, I mostly use an emerald green. I don't need to skip over there yet. I'm just trying to get it closer to a blue, but I don't want it to be too blue. If I go there, it's going to be too blue. So adding just a little bit of this warm cerulean that already bends on or leans to blue, or sorry, leans to green is a good idea. But I do want to desaturate it a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit of my red. It's a little too saturated. And I'm using the warmer red because I'm trying to desaturate it towards a warmer value, towards a warmer color. So even though the shadow is still cooler than the light mass, I don't want it to read like a different type of green. And maybe it is already, so I might need orange actually. So maybe not warm enough, so I move over to orange. a little better, but I went too dark. So maybe it's somewhere in here. There we go. Now it's starting to feel better. Yeah, much better. So I could either fight that other paint with a lot thicker paint, or I could just scrape it down and fight will be a little easier. I could also make a bigger batch of this green. And I'm just going to stick to my red formula that I did back there. And then I can start to make comparisons. I can start to say, let me soften these edges back here. Let me intensify the red on this side. Let me de-intensify it over here. So this front plane is our most intense ribbon. It's going to be more intense. This front plane will be more intense than any reds over here. And that's already more intense. Might need to be a little lighter. Oh, actually, even more red. Might even have a little bit of a tinted red. Go. And then the side is a very strange red. It's strange because it's getting reflected light off the floor, but off the blue, etc. This is not a Prima painting, so I'm not going to get into details. But what I do want to do is try to get that overall quality. It's a slightly darker red. I can bring in this warmer, darker red, bring that in. But it has a little bit of a blue tinting to it. Very, very strange color. It almost looks purple. And not dark purple. Darker than what I have here. Put that in there. Yeah, Florida. Make more of that. All right, we're gonna go ahead and take a break there. I've got everything, what I would call the block-in stage. I refer to a lay-in stage as being the stage where I did the sort of green layout where I laid everything out. Equivalent to drawing where I would have the contours of my light and shadow shapes. This is mostly a lay-in, sorry, a block-in. I just realized I didn't block in my shadows, but I'm gonna take a little break now and I can come in and I'll block in those shadows and we'll do another little pass on it before we end for the day. So let's go ahead and just take if I take a 10-minute break now, that gives me about half an hour forward. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording. We'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll continue from there. Now. All right, so this is almost the end of what I would call the block-in stage. I did forget to block in my little shadow under here. So I pulled some of my floor color. I accidentally contaminated it with red from there, but it'll be all right. I'll neutralize it a little bit. The shadow has a little bit more of a blue quality. I can use this blue, but that's a little bit too intense of a blue. We'll use a little bit of it and then just knock it down a little bit. And then the shadow comes from the back. And this front corner outward. And does that. And that quality. And fades off. And again, all Prima painting, so it's not gonna be perfect. Maybe I can clean up some of these edges from the forefront here. I'm just gonna take out this little blue underpainting stuff that's still showing through. A little bit in our background too. We are using some of our negative space to redraw our positive space. Which allows me to also try to sharpen this edge a little bit. All right, so now I got that taken care of. I want to start working from back to front. So how do I get these edges to be soft? There's a couple ways. Because it is wet into wet, I could just take a cleanish brush and just split the line. See what that does. That usually will soften it a little bit, especially if you do it a couple times. Another way to do it is to take the color that's here and the color that's here, mix them together to make an in-between color, and paint it in. This is what I refer to as a step as opposed to a blend. If we do this, we're blending the edges. Whereas if we take, let's say, the color of the top, and then we mix it with more of the color from the background. So we're taking the two colors in between and making an in-between color and value. And then run that along the edge too. That gives us a softer edge. Then you could even do it again by adding more of the blue. Oops, I got too much of the pink in there. Adding more of the blue to the color we just made. And this is where, if you do have a mole stick, it come in handy. that edge, very soft. And then I could, and since this is the one in the back, I might as well try to exaggerate it as much as I can. Because the more I do it on the front one, the more, or the back one, the more I exaggerate that back, the distance in the back, it makes it easier for the one in the foreground. And I'm gonna expand it even. I'm gonna and then blend it out down here. And so now I'm putting a lot of that atmospheric perspective in that spot there. And then if I push it even further in this space, I'm almost trying to lose the edge here. If you guys remember that, losing the edge. Almost want this to fade into the wall. And I'm paint, and you notice how I'm letting it paint over the colored block, the blue block, because I could come back in afterwards and do that. And then maybe I want to do a similar thing to this edge, but this edge is, you know, this side is not as long, and it's also not to the top, meaning facing the top. But I do want to get this edge to be a little softer. And then if I feel like I went too far, I could always bring back my background color or recarve. And paint this foreground a little bit, clean up this edge here. A little bit of the pink mixing through, but it's all right. It's all Prima painting. So now back to, and so now what I want to do is I want to strengthen this edge here so that it starts to move in front of this object. This was our lighter side. Luckily, I didn't mix plenty of that there. And then my purple will go over here. Realize this one a little too pale. What's there, blend it in with a little bit extra purple. good to step back every once in a while to look at your painting. Yeah, those color relationships look better. Well, I'm gonna drop a little bit of this. Maybe I should have done this before I did the blue. I'm just dropping a little bit of the color intensity on this red over here. Push it further back. But as it gets closer to the floor, I'll allow some of that intensity to return. Heck, we'll push it a little even further. We're trying to make 100 miles. Maybe even more.
Question, on the background red block, you soften the top of the block, but are you going to soften the bottom as well, or keep that kind of sharp?
I'm gonna keep it a little sharper than the top because that I'm kind of trying to let it blend. I might have even overdid it a little bit, which I could always, easily come back and just add a little bit more back into that top. Like if maybe I feel like it faded out too much. I could bring back some of that solidity. But yeah, I'm gonna make this softer than the bottom edge. Because the bottom edge is still at least touching the ground, right? And so essentially this is how you would move through the rest of the painting, back and forth. I would go there, then I'd do here, and then I'd do here, and then reevaluate and go back. So we're at just a little before end of class, but that should give you a good idea of how to do this assignment. From here, it's essentially just refining edges, reevaluating some color relationships. You have two different blend techniques you can use. You can split two edges, but I find that you don't get, it's a better practice to learn to step your values. And the reason I say that is, in some cases, it doesn't matter as much. In a painting like this, it doesn't matter too much. Even though, like for example, here where I split this edge, there is a slightly more intense color that happens right in between. It's not as important though as when you're painting, let's say, a portrait. The reason why it's better to learn how to step your values and step your color changes rather than just blending them together is that oftentimes that point between the shadow edge and the light mass, the edge that we normally blend out if we're just using that blend out technique, is actually the area where the most intense color happens. So if you were to look at a portrait of a person, and let's say the shadow is moving across the cheek, where the cheek turns from the light mass and starts to turn to the shadow mass, what they refer to as the terminus, right before that shift happens, you actually see more intense color. So if it's a cheek, you'll actually see a ruddier reddish color right before it moves into the shadow color, and right before it moves into the light mass color. And so it's better to learn this practice of this mixing your step values rather than blending those step values, because then you can recognize and see when that happens. If we get used to just blending those edges, blending colors together and blending edges together with a blend technique where you're just splitting the difference with your brush, or using a fan, even worse, using a fan brush or something, you're not really evaluating the temperature and the color and the value shifts that are happening in those areas. And like I said, oftentimes those are the areas where you're going to see the most intense color. And that leaves you for today. Is there any questions on the demonstration before I turn off the recording today or on this assignment? Nope, I'll go ahead and turn off the recording.